The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He's hiked the cost, he's hiked the crime, he's not worth the cost, and he's not worth the crime after 8 years. He's also not worth the hypocrisy. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been claiming for months that he had no involvement in or knowledge of the invitation of a former Nazi soldier to the visit of the Ukrainian president. Now we know that he personally invited that same individual. He actually said the opposite. And he said that the former speaker had to resign over doing the exact same thing. So will he hold himself to the very same standard and admit that he's not fit for office?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The attacks that the Leader of the Opposition is choosing to make against the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress demonstrates the extent to which this Conservative Party no longer stands with Ukraine. They have an opportunity in just a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, to stand and vote in favour of a free trade deal that Volodymyr Zelenskyy himself is asking this House to pass, and he is choosing to not stand with Ukraine, not stand with Ukrainians, and not stand with Ukrainian Canadians. Why are they abandoning Ukraine?
Alors.
Order.
Hill.
After months of feigned outrage and apologies on behalf of everyone else, a new report by the Globe and Mail shows that the Prime Minister's office invited a Nazi to his diplomatic reception in Toronto. He blamed the Speaker, saying that he acted alone. He's saying he had no idea about any of it. He called for him to take responsibility. He watched him resign, and yesterday he tried to blame the Ukrainian Congress. After all of the embarrassment all over the world, why is he above the rules that he applies to everyone else?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is a name that came from a community organization. Obviously, the Prime Minister had no knowledge of this, but here we know what is happening over here. We are voting today at third reading on the Canada-Ukraine free trade arrangements. Mr. Zelenskyy stood there and asked us to pass this. Their opposition to this bill is a moral failing of historic proportions in response to an effort to support our friends in Ukraine and repel the Russian invaders.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
What an embarrassment it must be for the House Leader to have to clean up the Prime Minister's mess every day. The invitation had the Prime Minister's name on it. It came from him, and for months he said only the Speaker invited him. It turned out not to be true. His own House Leader said that the invitation merited a Speaker's resignation. The Speaker resigned because of him, and all of them watched him do it. So will the Prime Minister be subject to the rules that he imposes on everyone else?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Again, Mr. Speaker, another small conflagration to mask their larger historical moral failing of not supporting the people and the armed forces of Ukraine and the President of Ukraine, who stood in this very chamber not months ago and asked us to support the Canada-Ukraine free trade arrangements. Then they voted against Operation Unifier and support for our troops that once again supports Ukraine. What is next, Mr. Speaker, and why will they not stop trying to hide their moral failings?
Shameful.
There are several experienced members of this House who do know that their time to speak will be recognized by the chair when they are supposed to speak. Otherwise, I ask you, please, to allow questions and to allow answers to be given so that the Speaker can hear it and so can anybody else who's participating here. The Honourable Member from Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was a shameful answer from that member, Mr. Speaker. Another day, another international embarrassment. After months of denials and throwing the former Speaker under the bus, now we learn that it was the Prime Minister who invited a Nazi to a reception with President Zelenskyy. He forced the Speaker to resign, to take the fall, so he could avoid responsibility and cling to power. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, he is not worth the cost to Canada's reputation. Why did the Prime Minister invite a Nazi to a reception with the Ukrainian Prime Minister?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Community event was held with the President of Ukraine, to which over 1,000 people were invited. In fact, some Conservatives were invited to that, Mr. Speaker. But we're not talking about any of that today because they care about this. They're pretending to care about this. This is fake outrage. Why? Because today we are voting on trade arrangements with one of our closest allies, the people in the country of Ukraine who are repelling as we speak and dying against Russian invaders. This is a moral failing of historic proportions, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The Prime Minister just keeps misleading this House. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister told this House on September 27th that he had no idea that a former Nazi would be involved in the events surrounding President Zelensky's visit. But now we know that the Prime Minister had personally invited that Nazi to his private reception in Toronto. He said that the Speaker of the House should resign for inviting a former Nazi to the House of Commons. After 8 years, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's relationship with the truth is pretty skewed. Will the Prime Minister apply that same standard to himself and ask himself to resign? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are talking about this. Why are we talking about this in the House today? It's because they are about to vote against a historic agreement between Canada and Ukraine at a time when both countries want to strengthen each other and strengthen their trade ties. We want to support them to get Russians out of their native land. This is a moral failure from the Conservatives, but they're trying to hide their moral failure when it comes to supporting Ukraine by bringing up this new issue. So will they stop their moral failings and vote in favor?